People ask me, how did I come up with the idea for simulation theory? There's many things that led me to that. One, my own memories of where I was before I came to Earth, which has been with me my whole life. And then I saw The Matrix in 1998. I saw The 13th Floor in 1998. But in 2006, I had taken a programming class. And in the programming class, it was conceptual, like concepts of programming, almost like the philosophy of programming or the basics of programming. So one of the chapters of the course was about object-oriented programming. And there were 4 characteristics, if I remember correctly, but they just blew my mind. It was polymorphism, inheritance, class, and objects. And I realized, prior to that, I had played SimCity. And I remember thinking, you play SimCity and you look at it, you're like, man, they got this whole thing figured out, and you introduce problems into your environment, and you control people, and you move people, and you shift people, and you put variables in to affect people. And I always hated it. I never liked to be controlled. I always wanted to be independent. I wanted to be free. I wanted to be out of the prison. And so seeing a game like SimCity made me say, if all this information was available for somebody to design this game, imagine what's known by the governments. And so then I was like, well, see, everything that happens in the world, I always want to one-up it. So I never wanted to watch TV, I wanted to create TV. I never wanted to listen to music, I wanted to create music. I didn't want to read books, I wanted to write books. Because I understood, I was like, you're not going to propagandize me, I'm going to propagandize you. I'm going to tell you what to believe, and not you, the audience, you, the establishment of, you're not going to condition me. You're not going to provide me this fabricated, fake version of reality when I remember where I came from. And so I got off tangent. I was speaking on that computer programming class with the polymorphism, inheritance, classes, and objects. It's always been with me that this is some kind of a simulation, because obviously I knew I actively chose to come here. So I was always trying to figure out how did they do it. And I remember at the time playing like Atari and Nintendo, because those were the only systems besides like computers. There was always like a slowdown when there were too many objects on the screen. I don't know if you remember playing Nintendo, but if too many like objects or characters got on the screen, it would start slowing down and you would see glitches in the game. And I used to look around at reality, I'm like, man, how do they keep the glitches from happening? How are there no glitches? It's like, every now and then you experience some kind of a glitch, like a deja vu or, something bizarre. But for the majority of your experience, everything behaves fairly consistent. Gravity, even though I know gravity may not be it, but whatever we call this, where something drops, that always consistently happens according to rules. So I'm like, all right, well, there's a physics engine. There's certainly some kind of a physics engine here. And I just wanted to know how, if I wanted to create my own universe, how could I do it? How could I do it on a computer? I was in computer clubs like in the 80s when I was in 3rd grade. I wanted to design this football video game that eventually got made by Nintendo. It was called NES Play Action Football. And the way they designed Play Action Football was exactly how I wanted to do it. I don't know if this is kind of a rare game. It's not something that's celebrated, but the way they angled it was how I was designing my little football game on a high-res grid screen. I don't even think the resolution was 320 by 240 yet. But I was trying to figure out how to program reality or how they do it. So once I learned about object-oriented programming and the polymorphism, the inheritance, the classes, and the objects, I realized, this might be how they do it. And I was also learning about Active Directory at the workplace and user accounts. So I started to think to myself, all right, so with the polymorphism and the inheritance, I could see how they could structure the data. And when I say the data, I mean the data. The data is so many things. When you look outside, I'm just like, man, look at the processing power. We got the clouds moving by. We got the wind. We have trees. And then on the trees, there's like little ants on it. And then there's birds flying in. And then there's leaves on the trees. There's so many things going on outside. And that's just those things. And there's squirrels running around the ground. There's grass growing. There's soil in the sand. And there's nutrients in the soil. So many things to program into this. I was like, man, these are stationary objects for the most part, other than the little ants. And well, no, they're not stationary. Everything's in motion, and that's what makes it even more bizarre. Like, man, all this motion, all this activity, all this data, how does it not slow down? Well, object-oriented programming reduces the amount of programming that's needed to make all this work. So watch this, for instance. So here's one way they might have this whole thing working. Instead of designing physics for every single type of creature, you write the program movement.exe once. And all of the objects use movement.exe to define their movement. So for instance, movement.exe is the software that defines what movement is. Everything, people, frogs, butterflies, all have an Active Directory account in the Akasha, the other world. And your user account has attributes about yourself. So and these attributes have to be scalable. So with your user account, you have attributes about yourself, and they're defined. The way you're going to appear has to be like a vector image versus a raster image, because you have to be able to expand without losing your pixelation. You feel me? Because vector images, you could continuously, expand them and no pixelation occurs, whereas raster images, the more you zoom in, the more you could kind of see the pixels. But we actually may be raster images, because the more you zoom in on your skin, you start to see the pixels break down. Because as they say, we're really empty space. And I don't know this for sure, I haven't verified, I haven't seen the atoms, but what we're told is we're made up of atoms, and the atoms are rotating at like a certain frequency. But basically, everything that's solid about our bodies is really an illusion. It's really just atoms spinning so fast that give the illusion of solidity, but we're really just empty space. So we may be raster images, because the more you zoom in, the more you see that we're really just a bunch of pixels or atoms. But for things to grow, you want them to be vector based. So a person has a finite amount of attributes that define everything about you. Most of it's governed through DNA, right? So you have your genes, which give you your eye color, hair color, how tall you're going to grow, how wide your arm span is going to be. Supposedly there's like a ratio, it's called phi, where if you measure yourself from head to toe and your wingspan, there's like some ratio that's the same with everybody. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's what I heard. I haven't measured it myself. If you notice, like your hand has finite, there's about like 140 something finite movements your fingers can make. So, our bodies are pretty well defined on the physical outside. The internal mechanisms of our organs and their functions are still being worked on to figure out what they all do, but they seem to be able to be modified through electrochemical injections and whatnot. So your attributes of yourself that make up your whole entire user account, and your whole user account is every single aspect about you, your body, your height, your length, all those things. And how they interact with movement.exe then determines how you're going to move, your speed, the way you'll look when you're running, or if you throw a ball, how that's going to look. But they only had to write movement once, and they only had to create your user account once. They didn't have to, like old video games, before there were keyframes, you had to draw every single part of the animation. So if you think of like a flip book, when you play with a flip book, you see every single part of that motion had to be drawn in different frames. And like a video camera is really showing you 24 to 30 frames per second, and it gives the illusion of motion, but it's really just still images over and over again. So whether it's you or me or somebody else moving, the movement, the physics engine, the API, you could just plug in movement and apply it to anything. And the way a frog is designed with its froggy, jumpy legs, that with movement gives it the hop. For flies, they get to fly. The movement.exe would reference the overall physics engine, movement. And this would also work for stationary objects like trees would go back and forth, and if they should sway too much from the wind, the roots would start to come out of the ground. It's all, but everything is all in objects. And I remember in The Matrix Reloaded, Neo is sitting with the Oracle on the bench, and she explains, you see that bird flying? There's a program that governs that. You see this? There's a program that governs that. And that also kind of led me to this idea of how all the universe was designed. Now this kind of thinking is fun. So in the comments, drop your ideas on how this whole thing was designed, how it was put together, and kind of relate it into programming if possible.